Good morning from a very brisk Austin, Texas. Today, I want to address a topic that is extremely sensitive. I don't know that it's very triggering, but it is very sensitive because ultimately there comes a point in some couples or individuals' recovery where their significant other refuses to get help. Sometimes they don't refuse, they just make it incredibly challenging to get help, right? Or they don't really maybe have the guts to say, I'm not getting help, but they continually make it challenging. Well, I don't like them, or I don't like that, or I don't like this, or I don't like that, or I don't have time, and all these different excuses. Inevitably, the reality is they just don't want to get help. And we can kind of sit back and listen to their excuses, and there's always excuses and there's always reasons. Let me throw out a disclaimer that very gently addresses the issue that yes, in some cases, some therapists or professionals, pastors, priests, rabbis, people of an authoritarian nature who are in a position that we would think would help us, have harmed us, have violated our trust, insulted us, wounded us. Absolutely. I get that. That stuff, I'd call it a different name, but that stuff is hard. It's difficult. I've had it happen to me. I've had a professional betray my trust a couple of times. It was infuriating. The likes of which I experienced a wound and an anger that I still carry along with me. I've forgiven them, but it was hard. It was painful. But that didn't stop me from getting help from someone else. In fact, it made me desperate for the right person, the right help, the right approach, because I knew I had work to do. I've thrown out my disclaimer. Now, the truth is, a lot of times we don't want to get help because we know what we're doing is wrong. Now, some of you may have just gotten really angry. Some of you may have shouted a big amen, or you may have pounded on the table and said yes. But it is true. Quite often, we don't want to get help, or we won't go get help because we know what we're doing is wrong. Now, I have to tell you, please brace yourself. This is true for the unfaithful. This is also true for the betrayed. I have seen many betrayed, hundreds over the years, who did not want to get help because they knew what they were doing was wrong. They were shaming, they were harassing, they were provoking, attacking their unfaithful. I get it. Man, it's hard, it's tough. Early on, sure. Those things can kind of happen, and anger, man, it's off the chart. But there's a point where that kind of stuff has to dissipate because the right help is stepping in. But if the right help doesn't have a chance to step in, that behavior keeps happening and it becomes perpetual. And now we've got even more damage to heal from. And then oftentimes a couple will end up divorcing, not because necessarily of the infidelity, but because of the collateral damage surrounding the betrayal. Let me just say, I love getting help by experts. I have experienced so much healing, so much breakthrough in my own life. I am an enormous proponent of the right people and the right process because that can change your life. But inevitably, there are moments where people say, I know what we need to do. I don't need somebody to tell me. Well, maybe your partner or spouse needs someone to tell them because they're tired of listening to you and they won't listen to you. And you've lost objectivity. You've been married 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Do you think that they can hear you objectively? Probably not, but they can hear an expert third party who doesn't have any skin in the game in terms of loyalty to one or another that they can hear from in a different way. Next, maybe you're not as aware of what you need as you think, right? So many times people say, I'm not going to therapy. I know what we need to do. But wait a minute. If you knew what needed to happen, maybe you wouldn't have had an affair and devastated your significant other, ripped their legs out from underneath them. In fact, blew their legs apart, blew their life apart. So let's be careful about our pride of thinking that we know what needs to happen when if we did, we wouldn't have done what we have done and devastated our entire family. So maybe it's time for an expert to step in and actually bring healing. And maybe have it not take years and years and years, but actually minimize that time because you're doing it the right way with the right people. We typically don't want to get help when we don't want to get challenged. We don't want to get confronted. We don't want to be adjusted. We don't want to have to face our own stuff, or particularly, we don't want to have to disclose new information that we know we haven't maybe disclosed. And so we think if we go to this expert third party, we're going to have to disclose information, and we don't want to do that. There's always a reason why we don't want to get help, and most of the time it is not a wounding. It is typically because we know what we're doing, or we know that our actions are going to have to change, and we don't like change. We don't want change, especially if we're angry and we feel like we've been wounded by our partner. We sometimes, if we're being honest, would rather stay angry and rather remain angry, and as I've talked about before, rather remain a victim and then use that against our significant other. I know, man, this is tough to hear. But if we want to heal, if we want breakthrough, if we want our lives to change, we have to get radically honest with ourselves and radically yet graciously honest with our significant other. Some quick roadblocks to not getting help. One is our pride. We just think, man, I know what needs to happen. I'm going to suggest maybe you don't. And maybe it's time to consider the possibility that you don't see everything, because if you saw everything, you could have fixed it before you actually had an affair. Or maybe you're so wounded and betrayed, you can't see in totality what needs to happen. So maybe letting go of your pride and trusting an expert can bring the healing that you haven't been able to see in your own efforts. Another roadblock is resentment. As long as there's resentment, your sexuality in your relationship will suffer immensely. Your communication will suffer immensely. Listen to this. I borrowed this the other day. I read it on Instagram. It said, resentment builds in the absence of radical honesty, and it kills chemistry. As soon as we begin holding back when our feelings have been hurt out of anxiety, avoidance, rage, anger, or even peacekeeping tendencies, we begin scorekeeping and building a wall. Let me tell you, infidelity is a scoreboard forever. Forever. And as long as we continue to use that against our significant other, we are going to remain stuck or a country mile apart that will remain that way until we can deal with our own resentment. Another roadblock is withholding, and not just withholding new information, sure, but I mean withholding a part of ourselves that we so desperately want to give and share with our partner. It could be wounding, it could be dreams, it could be desires, it could be fears. As long as we're withholding that stuff, it is a roadblock to oneness. It's a roadblock to intimacy. It's a roadblock to restoration. And as long as you refuse to get help, you are going to continue to withhold and not feel safe enough to actually share these parts of yourself. Finally, as I leave you today, this factor is probably one of the biggest ones that is a roadblock to healing, and that is self-abandonment. We've talked a little bit about it before, and I actually borrowed this online as well. It says, when we're overly focused on our partner, we can lose ourselves. If the relationship is hitting a rough patch, obviously, infidelity is a rough patch. The urge to fix our partner may be strong, but it's a distraction from working on ourselves. We may think we're being a good partner by being selfless, but it actually has the opposite effect. You see, you have to care for yourself. You have to confront yourself. You have to do your work too. As long as we're fixating on the other party, we're missing an opportunity for healing in ourselves. If you are resistant to getting help, I hope that these factors have caused you to maybe look at it a little bit more. If your partner is refusing to get help, maybe there are some pointers in here that can help. At the end of the day, I hope that you will at least get help for you, because you have the opportunity to take responsibility for you. I promise you, if you'll take responsibility for you, the marriage will change. It doesn't always change the way that you want it to, but you'll change and you'll feel better about yourself. And you'll look in the mirror and hold your head up high and say, man, at least I've done my work. I've been courageous. I like me. I love my life. My life needs me to be this way if I want the kind of life that I can be proud of. I hope you can be proud of yourself today.